Hi, welcome to the session on the third day of TPS Fest 2023. Thank you for joining us. If you are unfamiliar, there are some introductory slides that discuss what TPS is. It's the Teaching with Primary Sources community of SAA and basically the GLAMS universe. So we are grassroots volunteer organization that does continuing education opportunities and professional development. And it's a really fun group. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of it, and welcome if it's your first time. Next slide, please. Thanks. So if you are wanting to take notes, or if you want to view notes later, there is a link up on the screen currently for the massive note-taking document that goes across the entire event. So it is usually a selected note taker for the session, but you are welcome to add to them as you see fit. If you need accessibility accommodations, please notify one of us or our Zoom host, who is Catherine Buckley. And you also might want to check out our code of conduct and familiarize yourself with that if you are not. Basically just please be good. Please be good. That's it. There are also wonderful links up on the board currently of further information and the rest of today's schedule. You can also sign up for the listserv, and if you were sharing about your attendance today, you can use the hashtag. If you are having if you have any questions or technical difficulties, you can reach out to one of our facilitators or any of the helpers that have themselves tagged. It should be on their name in Zoom. So if you need anything, there are many ways to get the help you all need. With that all taken care of, I do believe we can get started. So this is Remixing the Archives, Current Students and Future Researchers. We all got together based on interest in a session of class collaborations that led to materials being put into archives and special collections for future researchers. So we have a lovely variety of projects to talk about today. And then once the small presentations are done from each of us, we will get into a bit of a discussion session and maybe even do some project matchmaking if there's interest. So thank you all for joining us. Relevant links should be in the chat. If someone would like to volunteer to take notes for the session, that would be absolutely fabulous. Thank you, Erin, for popping that in there too. If anyone is interested, please just respond in the chat so that we know someone's there. Anybody. All right, we're gonna assume it's gonna happen. All right, so thank you all for joining us. We're all gonna introduce ourselves as we get started in our own sessions. But preemptively, I am Mandy Shep, and thank you for joining us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Adonis.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. My name is Eric Adonis. I use she, her pronouns, and I am excited to be sharing some details about a project that I worked on in collaboration with a faculty member at Champlain College in Burlington, Vermont. Champlain is a small private college. We have about 1,800 traditional undergraduates who are on campus, and then a similar number of online students as well. So this project was one that I did in collaboration with Dr. Amy Ray Howe, who's an assistant professor at Champlain. Could I have the next slide, please? So Amy was teaching 3 sections of a required first-year course called Making and Doing. At Champlain, we have a 4-year interdisciplinary humanities-based series of required courses that all students take. It's called the CORE program. And this course was offered to second semester first year students. So still students who are kind of getting their feet wet in college, thinking about what it means to be a college student, and how in this moment, of course, coming out of the pandemic, but still with the pandemic fresh in their minds, how their lives have been impacted by the pandemic. So Amy was particularly interested in the concept of time capsules and how they played out over time. And so she selected that as her theme for the 3 sections that she taught of this required class. This is content from her about what her course objectives were. So she was thinking about how to get students grounded in this moment, the historical moment of the pandemic, and also as a college student in the early 2020s. Also having them think about what it means to be a person living in a certain time, and how we think about how people will reflect on our current day in the future. And then, of course, her final goal, which is primarily where I came in, was thinking about how archives work in terms of shaping historiography and what that could mean at Champlain College in specifically. Could I have the next slide, please? So I was super interested in collaborating with Amy, several reasons. I was really interested in, first of all, getting students aware and engaged with our college archives. It's great to hit those first year students, many of whom have no prior experience visiting in archives and might in some ways feel a little intimidated by what an archives is and how to visit, how to do research there. So this was a kind of a soft, backhanded way to letting them know that I'm not so scary. I was also really interested in thinking about ways to increase student representation in our archives collections, having identified that as an archival silence for our particular institution, and particularly interested in having students themselves curate some of that content going into the archives that reflects their time as college students at Champlain. Could I have the next slide, please? So I visited Amy's class twice. This was back in the days when we were still coming out of the pandemic, and because I have a very small reading room, was still not hosting classes back in special collections. So I actually brought some primary sources to their regular classroom in this case. And the first class visit kind of gave them an overview in terms of what an archives is, and had them do some critical thinking in terms of primary source literacy, archival silences, both generally and at Champlain, and some real world applications. How could they think about things like media obsolescence in their own lives, both personally and professionally going forward? Could I have the next slide, please? Speaking of media, I was really interested in showing them some different forms of media from our collection, both analog and born digital, and having them think through what it means to be an archivist, accepting content into the archives, and also preserving and sharing potentially obsolete forms of media that are in our collection. So we looked at things like materials on CD. We looked at 35mm photography. A lot of them are not familiar with slide photography, for example. We also looked at some extra copies that I had, duplicate copies of VHS tapes and some other forms of quickly becoming obsolete media, and had them think about what it means to when we digitize or normalize content, and the fact that the questions that we all as archivists encounter about whether the wrapper or the actual form of media itself is part of that collection's item. So when we transfer the content off of it, do we save one or a sample of that original form of media? And what content is there that we need to make sure we capture the metadata for before that gets lost. So an example that I use, for example, is, of course, all the photographs that people take on their smartphones and what's going to happen with those huge collections of images going forward, or if we're all not conscious of taking care of them and making sure we transfer them onto our new devices. Another great example is, of course, photo albums, family photograph albums, in various photography media. Many of students have encountered these in their own family homes. And we all run into the situation where some of the photographs are not labeled. So the folks from previous generations, sometimes their identification gets lost because of that. So that was a great entry point in terms of talking to them about the importance of capturing metadata. Next slide, please. This class was also a way to introduce topics in terms of rights, both in terms of consent. All the students who participated, who submitted items in the time capsules, signed a consent form. And part of that was discussing their educational privacy rights in terms of FERPA. Their generally privacy and confidentiality copyright for items they created or items they were considering adding to the time capsule that may have been created by others, as well as any content that may be pictured a third party or referred to a third party. So it was important to talk through all of these rights issues before they made final decisions about what to put in their time capsule. Next slide, please. So I went with the approach that I was interested in, kind of a hybrid, kind of non-traditional time capsule, in the terms of being willing to accept both analog and digital content from the students, and also wanting to make sure that I had a chance to review the content before it was sealed. And finally, these are not time capsules that got sealed in the cornerstone of a building or buried underground somewhere. These are actually in document record boxes sitting on the shelf in storage. They are physically sealed at this point, but I wanted to kind of bridge that gap and make sure, learning from the past in terms of both preservation and discoverability of time capsules created in the past, what could I do that would honor the spirit of the concept of a time capsule, but make sure that I was creating something, or having the students create something that was really going to be workable in the future. Next slide, please. All right, so there were 3 sections of this class. Each class created one time capsule, a mixture of analog and digital content. I would say most of the students lean towards analog content, but it was a pretty easy lift on my part to convince them to keep it to a maximum of 1 carton per section. In fact, 2 of the sections ended up in document boxes rather than carton sizes. So fairly small physical storage footprint, which was great as far as I was concerned. And they got to choose within some parameters when they wanted their time capsules to be officially unveiled and how that unveiling would work in the future. So for example, one of the sections, the section pictured on the left, they really wanted the opportunity to revisit their time capsule when they graduated, and then have it be sealed again before a final unveiling in 2032 in this case. So hopefully I've created a system that's workable both in the short term, and also I haven't handed my future successors a bag of tricks that will be difficult for them to implement. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the back end, the processing. After I officially received the time capsules from the students, I went through and verified their consent forms were completed. We have a standard consent form that I use for this for all student work that's being deposited in the archives, and they acknowledge that they're waiving their FERPA rights, and it gives Champlain College the permission to use their content to preserve and share it for nonprofit purposes, but it allows them to retain the primary copyright. So anything that was going into these time capsules that was created by the students themselves is something that they also retain some rights to as well. So I also went through and did some light preservation interventions with analog material, and then copied all the digital content and uploaded it to Preservica, and made sure that both physically on the boxes and in the metadata, that there was a record that this content was now officially sealed until the dates the students specified. So at this point, you're probably really curious about what the students wanted to put into the time capsules. And to honor their wishes, I won't go into too much detail about specifics, but I will kind of give you an overview of the kinds of things that they wanted to put in. So each student is reflected if they chose to participate and complete the consent form, which actually all of them did, but they had a chance to opt out if they didn't want to. The items reflect what was meaningful to them at their point of their life as college students at Champlain College, their own interests and personalities. So they were things like photos of important places or things in their life, music playlists, sentimental items from their childhood. I was really amazed by the number of students who were willing to part with something that had sentimental value, an original item that had sentimental value to them, and put it in these time capsules. There are a couple of students who put in like clothing accessories, and you can connect the dots based on the place where we are in Burlington, Vermont, and the time period, kind of the end stage of the pandemic, as to what those accessories might be. And each student also submitted a short essay that went along with their item. So it provides a little explanation about why they chose that item and how it was meaningful to them. Okay, one more slide, please. So just up on the screen, there are a couple of student reflections. We had students write reflections at the end of the course. And as you can see, they really great. Students really got it, both in terms of the importance of their content to the history of Champlain College, but also thinking more broadly in terms of critical thinking and reflection about what these items might say about the time period, and also themselves looking back in the future. So for me personally, this is a really rewarding collaboration project. And it was something that I definitely think was a highlight at my time at Champlain. I didn't mention this when I introduced myself, but this is actually my last gig as the Special Collections Director at Champlain, because I'm in the middle of a job transition. I'm moving over to the University of Vermont. And just a small plug before I segue, which is that this position at Champlain College is currently posted and open for applications. So thanks so much. I understand that we're holding questions until the end, so I look forward to hearing some feedback from you when we get to that point.
Thanks, Erica. That was so much food for thought. I'm so excited. Hello, everyone. My name is Marika van der Steenhoven, and I'm coming to you from Brunswick, Maine today. I am the Special Collections Education and Engagement Librarian here at Bowdoin College, and I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation. There are lots of thoughts that I have on this topic generally, and specifically, I'm excited to share with you a kind of case study project that is a forthcoming collaboration, but that has a lot of roots in some relationship building. So it's a really exciting, I think, and beautiful symbiotic relationship between student work, the broader Maine book arts community, and Bowdoin College's artist book collection. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background and then tell you a little bit about this forthcoming collaboration. And Catherine, we can stay on this slide for right now, and I'll just give you a prompt for when we need to change. So for those who don't know, Bowdoin College is a small private liberal arts school. We have about 1,900 students. I am one of about 7 members of Special Collections and Archives. We've had a really amazing period of growth in the past few years, including the addition of a Special Collections and Archives learning lab where all instruction happens. I am one of those 7 folks in Special Collections, and I'm exclusively doing the instruction. I also do exhibits, which plays into this conversation, as well as public program, which also folds into this conversation. And I handle about 80 sessions, so 80 visits to Special Collections and Archives an academic year, and that breaks down to about 40 different classes across 16 programs and disciplines. I always find that information super helpful, so I hope that provides just a little bit of context about Bowdoin. We're located in southern Mid-Coast Maine, and Maine has this incredible landscape of book artists, ranging from printers to paper makers to internationally renowned bookbinders, as well as antiquarian and contemporary art book dealers. We have a couple of book arts center across the state, hold a couple of book arts fairs, and there are collections here at Bowdoin, which I'll give you some more information, but also across the state that have been growing, including down up the road at Erin, who's monitoring the chat over at Colby College. So there's this amazing sort of network of book arts. For those who aren't aware, artist books can be defined in any number of ways. There are lots of contention around even where you would put the apostrophe in an artist book. But I generally tell students that come into Special Collections and Archives that an artist book is a book designer or an artist, visual artist, working with the book form. And so creating a piece that essentially engages with the book, broadly defined, as well as the time-based and sort of performance-based act of reading, so that those things all kind of come together, and that materiality is very important. So Bowdoin's been collecting artist books since the mid-1990s, and that was because the former director really looked at the landscape of Maine, and there was not an institution collecting artist books at that time. And so that's when our collection started in the mid-90s. Right now we have, depending on how you define it, about 700 examples of artist books. And they are really incredible teaching tools, and that's how I use them. So Intro to Environmental Studies comes and looks at our artist books, history, English, all sorts of different classes. But Catherine, if you flip to the next slide, we'll delve into what this project I'm here to talk about is. So since the mid-90s, visual arts, our Department of Visual Arts, specifically our printmaking classes, have been engaging with our artist book collection in advance of going back to the studio and making their own artist books. So it's been a really exciting process. The photos you're seeing here are from 2017. I put together an exhibition on color, collaborated with our printmaking faculty member, Carrie Skanga, to do a zine fest within our exhibition space, where students would, using the broad theme of color, create a printed zine for distribution. And then, of course, we got a full set of those zines that then became part of Special Collections and Archives. We have some fantastic examples of student work in our collection, student-made artist books that are coming out of Printmaking 1 and 2 and other affiliated printmaking classes, but they don't come to us in any systematic way currently. So what happens is that students feel excited about Special Collections and Archives, and we have a conversation. We also have a gift or a contribution form or a transfer form that we use to document that donation. Sometimes, as I mentioned, it's self-motivated. Other times it's the faculty member having a conversation about how they're really excited about this book, and connect the student and I, and we talk about how things, acquisitions come to Special Collections. We could go to the next slide, Catherine. Thank you. So since I've been at the college, which has been about 10 years, I've been 8 in this specific instruction position, I have been plotting with Carrie Skanga, who is our printmaking professor, about why aren't we doing a class specifically on artist books? We have this incredible collection. She worked at the Women's Studio Workshop and is also a book artist herself. So we put our heads together and for several years kind of planned and thought about what a artist book course could look like at Bowdoin. In fall 2022, so last year, the first iteration of that class called The Printed Book happened. Carrie taught the class in collaboration with book artist Rebecca Goodale, who lives just down the street from us, and we actually have an incredible collection of her own work. So the photograph, Rebecca has an incredible style sense. She's there in the red and the cheetah, the leopard print, and that is her fanning out one of her own books with a student in the class. So the way that worked was the students created, in this first iteration of the printed book, students created 3 book forms and they visited special collections in advance of each of those book forms to look at examples from our collection. So the class visit you're seeing here is in advance of students working on flag books, and the image all the way to the right of the screen is a student engaging with Hetty Kyle's one of her works, and she was actually the person who developed that flapping fun flag book binding style. Let's see where we're at. So if you could go to the next slide, Catherine. So a couple of the books the students created in that first iteration of the printed book came over to us in special collections and archives, and it's a wonderful example to have. The other piece that came to special collections out of that class was an example book that Carrie and Rebecca made together as a sort of example of the accordion fold book, which was the first book format that the students made. So what's fabulous is that we get not only the student work, but we have the sort of demo piece that was created in the class and is also a great example of 2 very different artists or different style artists working together across a book. And then we get to pull this out and use it in future class visits. So you can see this sort of like amazing kind of interconnected web here where we've got student work, main artists work who are like books that are coming out of the classroom setting. There's like a lot of exciting stuff happening in here. So Carrie is teaching the printed book again this coming semester, the fall, and I'm really excited. Actually, sorry, let's go to the next slide here because I realize I have so here's an example of a student work coming a little bit earlier, but you can see the same sort of style, right? We're teaching they're being taught this cloth covered binding with a little inset from a print, and then you open it up and you can see the variation here. This is a kind of accordion flag-ish style book, pulling a quote from Rachel Carson there. That's actually been in our collection for 10 years. So you can see there's a sort of pattern to how the projects have been evolving. So this coming year, this fall, what's happening is, and Catherine, you can pop over to the next slide. Thank you. Is that students are still going to make 3 book structures. So they're still going to come to special collections 3 times, and we're going to share, we just fill our learning lab with examples of both the print techniques and also the book formats that students will be doing. They're going to do an accordion fold, a flag book, and maybe a drum leaf binding, though I'm sort of blanking on that third one. So they'll come for 3 visits. And then this year we've added 3 additional visits. So the next 2 will be labs for students to come back, look at the books, the kind of culmination of all 3 of those book styles, to select a book, to write about one of those books, to do research about it. So they're selecting one book from the collection and spending a lot of time with it, and then doing a little bit of secondary research about it. And then they're going to put that book into conversation with one of their own books, so one of the books that they made. And they're going to do a little bit of writing about that. What you see here is our exhibition space, which is a space that we do an exhibition per semester. Lizzie Kaplan is on the left there. We just took down her exhibition. She curated, spent a summer interning with me where she looked at the history of the Environmental Studies Department at Bowdoin and curated a full exhibition. And you can see the other students are exploring another exhibition that was curated by a student the previous year about the history of women and gender at Bowdoin. So I'm just giving you a little preview here about our exhibition space because the work of the students in this fall in the printed book will be culminating in an exhibition that will open spring 2024. So that third and final visit that students will be doing this coming fall will actually be a pop-up preview exhibit. One of the things that I find so devastating about putting artist books into an exhibition case is you can't do the thing that I think that they're meant to do, which is to handle them, to move through them, to spend time with them, to see sort of how the format and the content of the book kind of speak together, work together to kind of do the work of the book. And so it was really important to Carrie, the professor, Rebecca, who's going to be the visiting artist again, to really kind of have students share the physicality, the materiality, the movability of their books. And so the final class visit will be towards the end of the semester, and we'll be doing this pop-up exhibit where basically all of the content on all of the books will be there, but it'll be held in our learning lab where people, the Bowdoin community and the general public will be invited in to engage with the books and to kind of talk to the artists directly and to get a sense of what the exhibition will look like. So that's a little bit about the forthcoming collaboration. I'm super, super excited about it. I think, you know, when I think about this session about being kind of contributing to the archive, what I'm really excited about is the content of students interpreting the collections that we have, the artist books that are in our collection. So students kind of looking at these works, writing about them, researching them, and then making them meaningful to their own artistic practice. So I'm really excited for that to be a contribution. There will be a physical exhibit as well as a digital exhibit, and then we archive all of our exhibition material. So it will become part of the college archive as an example of some of the exhibition work that we do. There will also be that choice for students to make to donate their books to the collection, especially since they'll be doing a little bit more editioning, which means that they'll be making more than one book. So it'll be a little bit easier to part with that original artwork. And one of the things that I'm really excited to think about moving into the spring semester and thinking about how to activate this exhibition space is the opportunity to bring some of the artists that are represented in the exhibition to Bowdoin to talk about their work, to be in dialogue with students. There are a lot of really exciting pieces. The collection at Bowdoin represents Maine artists and bookmakers, but we also have examples from across the country and internationally as well. I'm just looking at time, which I think maybe I'm going to put in two more little points about that I'm really excited. In addition to the class visits, what's happening this coming semester around the printed book, this course, is that we're collaborating on some artist talks. So Carrie and Rebecca, so Carrie Skanga, the printmaking professor, and Rebecca Goodale are going to be giving a public talk about their collaborative process. They work together and they have a forthcoming artist book. So they're going to talk about that. We're going to have examples of their work and work from the collection on view. And again, that'll be open. The students will be in attendance, but it'll also be open to the public. So a way to kind of continue to build community around books and excitement around artist books in the collection. And then the other speaker that will be kind of connected to this class is a woman named Cynthia Marsh, who is another book artist who I've developed a friendship and relationship with over the years, who recently retired to Maine and who donated her artist book collection, her own personal artist book collection. So not necessarily representing her work, but the work of other artists who she respects. And so she's going to come in and talk about, right, like collaboration and networks and community in her collection. So I think there are lots of opportunities to think about the ways to pull in community, however you define that. I think that there's so many different ways to think about donor relations, collection developments, exhibition, and instruction, and also a really cool way to put to demonstrate the value of our collections, but through the perspective of students. So that's the kind of whirlwind, what's in store. Let's see that. I'll just go to the next and final slide. And again, just talking about like this demonstrated value. Kaylee Bennett graduated in 2014. She worked for me in special collections and archives during her time here. She made a book in 2013. And then just a couple months ago, she popped in to visit and we pulled out her book, and look at that smiley, happy face. So as Erica mentioned, we're going to hold questions till the end, but here's my info, and I'm pretty sure I'll post some content about this project on our Instagram account. So that's the handle there. And thank you all so much.
That was awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that sounds like a fabulous project. That is very, very inspirational. Thank you for all that good stuff. I'm going to do the final presentation for this session with the wonderful, fabulous support and help of Mary Beth Stevens, who was the faculty collaborator on the SUNY Fredonia Bicentennial Podcast Project. Next slide, please. So this project is still happening. We are not quite at our bicentennial yet. SUNY Fredonia is going to have its 200th anniversary in 2026. This is a picture of our Fredonia Academy, which was the first iteration of our college. It opened in 1826, and the building is slightly changed. It still exists in downtown Fredonia as our opera house and village hall. So it's kind of neat to still see these structures in some places. It gives students a bit of a visual reference to connect to in terms of the university's history and where it is in our town and how far spread out this has been. So really what we wanted to do is thinking about how can we bring the archives in and make this a part of a bicentennial. I'm a podcast person. So I've been listening to a lot of really cool university history podcasts where they do interesting things to highlight their college history and their organizational history. One in particular that I absolutely loved was Hindsight is 2019 from Dartmouth. It's another one that frames things in the context of archival collections and artifacts to kind of tell the story. And I really wanted to do my own, like a spin on that and find some wonderful history faculty. Our history department here is wonderful. They are very supportive of special collections and archives, and they do a lot to kind of bring in students and collaborate, and they're always open to try whatever wacky thing that I suggest. So what we really wanted to do was construct an institutional history through the lens of the historical artifacts in our collections. We're fortunate enough that we have a lot of artifacts from the very beginning, the 1820s, up through today. It's an organic, evolving, ever-growing type collection. It was really important to us that we had students select their items that kind of connected with them or represented their interests. And ideally, we wanted it to highlight significant points. For a bit more on this, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Beth.
It would help if I unmuted. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. So essentially, I've been working with small groups of students as either a capstone project for the history major or simply a mentored research project that students do. And I've been bringing students into the archives. Mandy runs sort of a, here's how the archives work session with them. And then we provide them with just a sample of archival materials from, I have essentially focused on specific time periods in the college's history. So the first time I did this, we focused on the academy years, which was 1826 to 1866. So Mandy had pulled out all of the archival materials there. And the students went through these, pulled out ones archives, artifacts that they enjoyed and that they thought were meaningful. They researched their artifacts, and I really encouraged them, to develop their historical thinking skills. I encourage them both to dive deep into the object, into the artifact, to really do a deep analysis of it. What does this particular artifact reveal about Fredonia? What does it reveal about the academic course of study, about student life, about faculty? All of these things say something about the values that were important to people at the institution at the time. All of these things tell us something about what it meant to become an educated person in 1850 or 1920, for example. But then I also encourage the students to, after they've done their deep dive, then I want them to move outward and connect the artifact with something beyond the walls of the Fredonia Academy or the Fredonia Normal School or the State University of New York at Fredonia, to mention the different iterations of the college that have existed over time. So I encourage the students to try and connect their artifact with some of the larger trends, events, and issues going on in American history, right? How do we see the larger society reflected within the smaller institution? So the students do this research, and then they write up a nice little narrative essay explaining their findings, and they create a podcast script. They also create a script. They create the actual podcasts in collaboration with students in our audio recording major. So we're bringing in more students to work with our students. At first, Mandy and I were thinking of doing 20 objects, one for each decade of Fredonia's existence. But the project has grown way beyond that to include other elements of campus history. This past spring, I did a course where the students focused on the buildings and who they were named after. And they did research on those individuals. So we're thinking that it's probably going to be more than 20 podcasts. We also Mandy and I have noticed that we have certain things that we believe are central to the history of the college that sometimes students don't want to pick. So she and I are actually going to research and write a couple of podcasts on those, what we feel are important artifacts that need to be talked about that just haven't grabbed the students' attention. Do you want me to throw it back your way, Mandy?
Whatever you'd like to do, totally fine. Next slide, please. Either way. So here's a few examples of the student project, the items that they chose. They really kind of connected with some different resonancy, different items. I was very happy that someone chose a scrapbook. Scrapbooks are so cool. They have so much life in them that are very, like, it's not an entirely text-based object. It's a very personal item that really gives someone's story. This one I was also an absolute sucker for because it's got a dance card in it with the tiny pencil, and you get to explain that whole process to students. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. This particular one, she kept, the student was here from 1906 through 1910. So she has a lot of like turn of the century type things. There's a lot of comments on new things that you can do in society. So it's kind of interesting to see that perspective. And from a student to a student, it gave the student who worked with this named Callie an opportunity to really kind of put herself in this student's shoes at the normal school and see what her experience was like and draw parallels and draw connections. And it was absolutely fabulous. It was a really fun time. The random things that she found that asked questions about were so great. Like the gift cards for every occasion and little tiny notes and things like that, and calling cards and explaining what those are. So it's always a good time. So then this is how the final product lives for now. On the right, it's a shot of our SUNY digital repository, SDR. It's structured in DSpace. So it's kind of our holding tank for finished products until we have kind of collected them all and want to sequester them for broader release. Next slide, please.
Actually, Mandy, could we stay on that last one? I was going to say, I talked a lot about how I was encouraging students to do the deep dive and then go out and broaden. And I'll just give you an example of that from this particular project. One of the little things that Kelly found in this scrapbook was a napkin that was a memento from a dinner at which a sorority that Irene Romaine belonged to held a mock election in 1908. And this, of course, got Kelly interested in, women's suffrage. This is before women had the right to vote. I wonder if there's any, is there a connection here, with what's going on in the external society? And she did a little bit more research and discovered that, yes, in fact, Chautauqua County, where Fredonia is located, was a hotbed of women's suffrage activism in this time period. So there was her connection with the outer world, showing how that what's going on in the broader society around the college is influencing these students and the young women who were there. Sorry for that interruption.
Oh, you're fine. Next slide, please. And then this is from our more recent one. We haven't completely finished the podcast upload on DSpace yet. So this is from the building namesakes. In the 60s, our campus went through a humongous expansion of beautiful, gorgeous, brutalist architecture in our lovely, quaint Victorian town. So on the far right is the building that was erected, which is our art center. It houses several theaters, a few galleries, and a lot of classroom and learning space for students in theater and dance, as well as the visual arts. So in the center is a photo of Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York at the time. And he traveled all the way here to name this art center building after his recently missing son, who is the subject of a very interesting historical mystery. I can turn that over to Mary Beth for slight context.
Sure. So Michael Rockefeller, the Rockefeller Arts Center was dedicated in 1969. And the governor had actually asked the campus if we would name this building after his son, his youngest son, Michael. And of course, when the governor asks a campus to name a building after someone, who is the campus to say no? So Michael Rockefeller, a rather tragic story. He went missing and was presumed dead in 1961 at the ripe old age of 23. Michael was extremely interested in the Asmat peoples on New Guinea and had taken trips there and had returned from these trips with a lot of Asmat art. And in 1961, he returned to visit again and probably acquire more of the Asmat art when he went missing. There is actually some evidence that he may have been murdered and cannibalized by the Asmat people. And this is what got the student who did this project interested. She just said, "Cannibalism? Are you kidding me? How can I pass this up?" But again, that process of going deep into Michael Rockefeller's story and then going out again led her to an entirely different issue, which was, of course, the issue of stolen artifacts and the whole movement today to repatriate many of these stolen artifacts around the world. When the Rockefeller Art Center opened in 1969, one of the first exhibits it showed in its exhibit space was a collection of Michael Rockefeller's Asmat art. And one of the questions that Anna, the student who did this project, had was, my goodness, would our archives and our art gallery allow such an exhibit to happen again? An exhibit of essentially stolen artifacts. And so she went and asked to find their current exhibit guidelines. And she found that they had, of course, changed dramatically from 1969, and that such an exhibit would no longer be acceptable because of the provenance of these artifacts, that they had in fact simply been taken from the Asmat people. So she again was able to take this story particular to Fredonia, particular to this young man's life, and connect it with a topic that has real relevance today. And taking it one step further, and it's always wonderful when something like this happens. She's decided as a result of this project that she wants to go into the world of archives and museums as her career trajectory because of researching this young man's life and the various controversies around his art collection. I'll throw it back your way, Mandy.
Sounds good. Next slide, please. Once again, our completed episodes get kind of wrapped into a Google Drive. Once we have our complete range of history of the university, these will all be released as a massive podcast project, probably using traditional RSS type feeds to give it a wider audience than just the campus community. Next slide, please. So I would like to open it up for questions for everybody.